All right. All right, good morning. Everyone's staying cool. It's supposed to be brutal, like tomorrow, I think is 100. Today's only 95. Only, right? I'm like over 80. I'm not a fan of the hot weather, and like 100 is way too hot for me. So I'm so grateful for our nice, cool classroom today. Try and be grateful for the little things when it's that hot. I had another thought, it just left me. I was thinking about being cool, right? We start soccer next week and it's gonna be so hot and I'm just like, I don't want to, right? I love the soccer teams, but I don't love being out in the heat with a bunch of little kids kicking balls at me. Anyway, today we will start chapter 2. And as part of this chapter, we will be doing a little of like kind of brainstorming some research ideas, which I told you to try and think about since last class. So if you completely forgot, in the back of your mind in the next like 40 minutes or so, kind of be thinking about again, if you could study anything related to sexuality, what might it be? We're going to come back to that a little later today. But we'll talk about some of the big sexuality researchers, some ways that we can conduct sex research, some issues, a lot of issues with research related to sexuality, which makes it kind of hard and limited. We don't have as much information as we hopefully or probably should. And then we'll be doing a little bit of like our own kind of research work as well. So that's our plan for chapter 2. Before we start, just as a side note, the birds and the bees, right? I have this little researcher with the birds and the bees. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. We're going to talk about the birds and the bees, kind of a metaphor that we use to teach children about sex. I don't know if it's the best metaphor, but the idea behind it is that bees carry and deposit pollen into flowers, which is kind of like an easy to explain or see version of like male fertilization. And then birds lay eggs, like women have eggs. So that's where the term comes from, as a side note, if you've ever wondered why the birds and the bees. But that's what we'll talk about here, sex researchers and people researching this topic. Now, one big part of this, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here because I want to focus elsewhere, but a big part of chapter 2, if you're reading it on your own, which hopefully you are, has a lot to do with different theories, right? And this was the topic today in our abnormal psych class, right? Theories or models are very much a big part of psychology. And there are a bunch of different theories or models or structures within research on sexuality as well. Now, we're not going to focus on them, but I might ask you about them on the exam. So they're in your book. I believe they start on page 28 or so. So definitely make sure you look over these on your own. But there are these assumptions or principles or methods that guide your view of something. And in this case, it's sexuality. What has made you the person that you are today? What has shaped your sexuality? And these different theories provide this structure. And you can look at them all separately, but we often tend to combine them because separately they don't cover everything, but together they kind of will capture that picture. But when we talk about sexuality, it could be something, for example, that is very shaped by your thoughts or expectations around your gender or your orientation or around sex. It could be something more biological, your hormones and how they shape you and fuel you and change you. It could be very much like behavioral. What have you been rewarded or punished for that maybe has shaped your ideas around sex or your beliefs and expectations around sexuality? So I'm not going to focus here, but again, make sure you look over them in the book because they might pop up on that first exam. What I want to focus more on are the researchers and some of the like research and issues related to this topic. And people who study sexuality are called sexologists. Imagine looking at your parents. That's what I want to be when I grow up. A sexologist. Would you love that? I would love that too, right? I think that would be so much fun, right? It's so funny. I don't even know how this happened. I don't know why I'm sharing this with you. But in my family, whenever we talk about sex, okay, so my kids are 11, 11, and 13, right? So my 13-year-old, she's a little more comfortable, but like kind of like pretends she doesn't want to know, but she wants to know. But my 11-year-olds, whenever we talk about sex, they call it Sir Francis Drake. And so they'll be like, is there Sir Francis Drake in this movie? Are we going to talk about Sir Francis Drake? And it was like this weird, like, they confused sextant like the tool that Sir Francis Drake used to like measure like the maps and navigate the ocean. They confuse sextant with sex, and so they're like, Sir Francis Drake studied sex. They're like, no, it was a sextant, totally different. And so now in our house, whenever we talk about sex, it's Sir Francis Drake. That's so random. Or Saturdays, because there was a study that said couples are more likely to engage in sex on Saturdays. So every time it's Saturday, my oldest daughter's like, it's Saturday today. I'm like, thank you for letting me know. And I'm like, that's nice, right? She's just like, are we gonna talk about Saturdays? And it's, we have all these weird codes in our house, right? Random thought to share with you there. Hopefully it's not too random. But when we talk about people who study sex, I'll bring it back here. So we call them sexologists, right? So lots and lots of people who have studied this over time, but a lot of them ran into big issues. This is a controversial topic to study, and it's complicated, and people don't always want to share their views and thoughts about sexuality, or they might not know, right? That's a big part of it too, right? They might not know. And so when we go back, some of the first recorded people to study sexuality go back into like the 19th century. So it's like 1800s. And at that time, though, we only looked at bizarre, dangerous, and unhealthy aspects of sex. Those were the things that were studied. And it was largely done by physicians, by doctors, who were looking at it from like a very medical standpoint and nothing like psychological whatsoever. Very, very problem-driven and fragmented. Like a lot that we haven't known. It's not until even like now that we're starting to maybe study it a little more in depth. And even then it tends to be something that's a little bit taboo. So heavily influenced by the politics and events of the time. I think we see that a lot right now, right? Politics can play a big role in what's talked about and what's not, what's relevant and what isn't. So this is something that's been around for a while, but at every stage, including today, very problematic, very like complicated to study. And very needed. We need more people to study sexuality, but it can be kind of a complicated thing to do. Some of the players in the field, these are some of the smaller contributors. The big ones are on the next slide. But these are some of the first people to study sex. Freud. Freud was all about sex, right? He spent a lot of time studying sexuality, repressed sexuality, right? He called the sex drive the libido, right? And he talked about how it manifests in different parts of the body as we develop and as we grow. First one to kind of talk about these theories in psychology. He was a really big name in that. Yeah. Libido is your sex drive. Okay, so libido equals like your sex drive or sexual energy. And Freud believed that this would like kind of root itself in different parts of the body as you got older and would manifest in different ways. He was the first one to talk about sexuality as it relates to like psychology and human development and growth, right? Very controversial theories at the time, right? And still a little bit controversial. The other people, again, all kind of small players, but little contributions along the way. Havelock Ellis wrote a book called The Studies in the Psychology of Sex, one of the first books written related to sex. Really dry and boring. Hard to make sex boring, but he did it, right? And so it never led to a lot of like fame or notoriety, but he was one of the first to publish a book related to this. Ewan Block, I've heard it both ways, published the first journal related to sexuality. You don't need to know. You don't need to know. I'm just kind of sharing. So, but the first book was Ewan Block, or I'm sorry, Havelock Ellis. Magnus Hirschfeld, right? The third one up here. He was in charge of the first institute for sexology. So he opened a like place where people could come and ask for advice and help. It was like a little office in his home, and people would come in and ask him questions. It was vandalized and burned down multiple times because it wasn't accepted to do so, but he was the first to try and do something along those lines. Richard von Krafft-Ebing, quite a name there, wrote this book over here on the right, Psychopathia Sexualis. Very interesting covers, right? Like that kind of would make you want to open that book and read it a little bit. All about Saturdays. No, I'm just kidding. But this book is
from a very medical perspective. It was kind of like medical conditions related to sexuality, but it gained a little more popularity because of the provocative nature of the cover. So all of these people up here, oh, and then Clelia Mosher at the bottom was another contributor. She tried to study things like birth control, women's sexuality, and women's rights. Again, all of these people met with extreme opposition, violence, vandalism, right? Or just being shunned in their academic communities, like we saw with Freud. As we got a little closer to now, we had a couple of people who had more success, right? And are a little more prominent. They've had bigger contributions. Probably the most famous sex researcher of all time was a man named Alfred Kinsey. Kinsey, and that's a picture of him up there on the right, was probably the most influential sex researcher of the 20th century, of the 1900s. Right? Which sounds like a long time ago when you say it that way, but of like the 1900s. So he was a biologist and an entomologist, a professor. He wrote some very big books related to sexuality. He was the first one to do like a massive study related to sex. He asked thousands upon thousands of people, and he wrote a book about male sexuality and female sexuality. Really, really flawed in his statistical research design. Lots of issues from like a psychometric or statistical perspective. But he was the first one to do this massive scale study. And I'm going to show you a little part of a documentary on him in a couple of minutes. Really interesting guy, right? Really cool guy too. Yeah. Entomology, he studied bugs, right? Bugs, right? A biologist and an entomologist, right? Yeah, and he noticed that there was so much variety in bugs and in creatures, little creatures, that he thought there had to be the same variety in people. And he became really interested in sexuality. He taught the first human sexuality class in this country, right? The first one ever. And you had to be married to take it. People would fake being married to take this class. They wore like fake engagement rings, right? Because you had to be either engaged or married to be in the class. Wild, right? Like hard to believe. More on him in a couple minutes. Again, I have about like a 22-minute documentary on him I want to show you. Masters and Johnson were another big like contributor. Masters and Johnson were the first scientists to record people having sex and study it. Now, I want you to imagine, this is something that we're going to talk a little bit about, maybe more next class, but would you be willing to volunteer for sex research? And how far would you be willing to go? Because what Masters and Johnson did were literally record hundreds of couples engaging in intercourse, heterosexual couples only, but they would get a man and a woman, put them in a room with video cameras, hook them up to all sorts of instruments and be like, go, right? And they would record what their bodies did, how their bodies responded, how long the intercourse lasted, how many times they orgasmed. They came up with the different phases of sexual response that we'll talk about later in the semester. Really critical research. But imagine you probably have a bit of a bias, and we'll talk more about biases later, but what kind of people might volunteer for something like that? I certainly wouldn't volunteer for something like that. I think sex research is important, but I don't think I would go that far, right? That's really invasive, but it's important information at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, right. So yeah, it was right. They knew each other. Yeah, it was couples, typically married couples, right? That'd be interesting, right? Bring them in and like, what are you volunteering for? Right? Never know, right? And they often give them like a small stipend for doing this, like a small amount of money. And they would record them having sex, hundreds and hundreds of couples, and it gave them a lot of really good information. Was there another? That was something. Change your mind.
I was just gonna ask about.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but yeah, they got paid. They made a whole documentary about them and about everything too. I think I have it right here. The Masters of Sex that was on Showtime not that long ago. Really, really interesting couple, Masters and Johnson, who did that research. Yeah. Yes, so Kinsey, and we'll talk about that in chapter 11 when we talk about sexuality, sexual orientation. But yes, he was the one who developed the scale of like 0 to 6. Whether you're exclusively heterosexual to exclusively gay, and then kind of in the middle, equal parts of both, which we call bisexual. Yeah, he was the first to come up with a scale related to sexuality. They mentioned that a little in the documentary too. He really gave us a lot of information, but again, it was very statistically flawed, sadly. Any other thoughts at the moment? Yeah. Yes. So they were together, and then they were married, but they got divorced. Eventually they divorced like 20 years after they finished their research. But yeah, they were a couple that were together. All that research, watching all those couples have sex, they're like, no, I don't know, that's not true. Don't hold me to that. All right, Evelyn Hooker, could you ask for a better name as a sex researcher, right? Evelyn Hooker was one of the first women to have like a prominent role in sex research. She had a really big part in challenging the view that homosexuality, identifying as being gay or lesbian, was a mental illness. So for a long time, all the way up until 1973, which is a long time ago, but not that long. But in 1973, her research led to homosexuality being removed from the DSM. The DSM is the book we use to diagnose people with mental illnesses. So up until 1973, if you were gay or lesbian, you had a mental illness that required treatment, oftentimes shock therapy and exposure therapy. But up until then, her research helped to get that removed. So one of the prominent women to play a role in like early sex research. But we don't have anyone who's been massive since, right? Like we don't have lots of little contributions, but there's still a really big gap in this field, a lot of need for research to better understand like how our bodies respond, what attracts people, what makes your orientation. There's still a lot we don't know. So I have as I said, a little documentary about Kinsey. It's like an hour, but I'm only going to show you, I believe it's like 22, I think it's 28 minutes. So I have 28 minutes. So it's 28 minutes about Kinsey. That's going to tell you a little bit about his life, about his class that I mentioned. Really interesting. It's still kind of like back in that era where like very different times. Again, imagine having to get married to take this class. That's just wild to me. But I'll play this for you. You don't need to take notes or anything. Just pay attention, and I'll post it on Canvas if you miss something or want to go back and reference it. Came at it from a biological perspective, which was really different than anyone had done before him. And after like that excerpt, they go into like the second half of the documentary where he took all of that data that he gathered and he wrote a book about men, which he called, what was the name of it? Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And then he wrote one about women, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. And these were massive books. Everyone purchased them. They would buy them as wedding gifts for their partners so that they could understand better what to do and not to do. It just was the first time that all this data had been out there. Though, as I mentioned, he had a lot of issues with his sampling. He didn't get good samples of people. It wasn't random. It was just like who was convenient. He asked too many people. You actually don't need to ask that many in order to get good results. He asked thousands, but it was still the first and remains like the biggest scale sexuality research project that we've ever had. So really big place in the field. And like I said, really, really interesting guy. Some of the issues that he ran into and that we see a lot of in sex research, as I mentioned, is like, a couple of them that are at the bottom here, but two, to just back up, whenever you do any kind of research, whether it's sexuality or other, you have to have informed consent. And he didn't always do this with the people that he asked. He would just ask students random questions and then record it, right? If I wanted to use you as a research participant, I'd have to have you sign something, give me permission, tell you what I'm using it for. That was something that he definitely had a little bit of a weak spot with because it was his students that he used. And you have to maintain confidentiality. He did a good job of that, of not sharing like this person said this and this person has done this and so on. Though, as I love as they said in the film, the boys figured out that the girls who came out later had had sex, so they waited for them, right? So resourceful on their part. But trying to maintain confidentiality is huge in any kind of research, especially something as sensitive as sexuality. A big thing that you see here, and this is where Kinsey really messed up, was the volunteer bias, or kind of a slanting of your data. So let's say I wanted to do research and I'm like, ooh, look, participants, right? Like, it would be so easy, right, to ask all of you, or maybe even make you participate as part of the class. I could ask you, but I can't just ask you, right? Let's say I wanted to do research on like the number of times people have sex, okay? And I only ask prostitutes. Is that going to be accurate? Like, I want to ask prostitutes or like sex workers, right? Like, I want to ask people who do that for a living, but I'd also want to ask people who are celibate, people who are married, people who are in long-term committed relationships, people who are single. I'd want to ask everyone, right? So you have to be really careful with who you ask. And this was a big mistake that he made. He only asked his students because he had a convenient sample, right? So you need to be careful if people volunteer, it can slant the research. And this was one of the criticisms of Masters and Johnson, who only used people who volunteered to be recorded having sex, right? Is it a different type of person who would volunteer for that than the average person? I would say maybe, right? And so those were issues that a lot of people like Kinsey and Masters and Johnson ran into. You also run into a lot of issues, people lie, right? Maybe they didn't want to tell the truth. Maybe they felt embarrassed to admit their sexuality, or maybe they don't know their sexuality, like their orientation. If they don't know how you define sex and you ask them, how often have you had sex? Is that information accurate? Right? Like if that one woman who thought the pinky's touching, if that's sex and you ask her how often she had sex, that information might not mean the same thing from me to you, to her, to whoever. Right? So those are issues that we run into with like consistency and reliability, validity and accuracy. And those are just across any kind of research. But you see it a lot here as well. And I'm hoping that I can give you an opportunity to see that a little bit too, and like what we're going to do from here. But there are so many issues and people get uncomfortable or they don't know. And you run into a lot of that with sex research. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Totally, right? I mean, think how often if you get nervous, you might just give like a random answer just to have it be over with, right? And like with sexuality, especially at that time, like 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, I don't think of progressive at that time, right? And so people might have lied a lot. Or bigger thing, a lot of them just didn't know. They didn't know any better, right? And we'll talk about our orientations and gender identities. Like there might be some of you who don't know, or maybe it's evolving and changing and it's different today from when I ask you tomorrow, right? That's okay. That's okay too. So what I want to do from here is I want to take a little bit of time, the time that we have like maybe about 20 minutes. And we need to be a little focused during it, but I want to take about 20 minutes. We have okay. So I want you to get into groups of like 3 to 4 people. I don't want it to be bigger than that because we don't have that many of us. So 3 to 4 people. Go ahead and find a few people around you. You're going to be spending the rest of today and all of next class doing people. So definitely get into a group. I'll give you a moment. Turn your desks toward each other. 3 to 4 people max. Okay? So not more than 4. If you only have 2, that's okay too. It just makes your life a little harder. Okay. So the 2 of you could partner up if you want. Or one of you could join and one of you could join it. So we have 2 groups of 3 if you want to divide up. It's up to you guys. Yeah. Or they can do 2 of them. It puts a little more pressure on you, but if you're fine with that, I'm fine with it. Okay. Wait, does everyone have a group? Okay, so we have 3, 3. Okay, beautiful job. That was it. No, I'm just kidding. That was everything. Okay, so here's what I want you to do for the next like 15 minutes or so, and I will try my best to wander around as best as I can to get to you. In a group, I want of you write this down on a piece of paper. You're not turning it in, but keep track. What do you want to know? If you could conduct any research study related to sexuality, what would you want to know? Okay, and what I want you to try and focus on is something that you could actually do.
Okay, so like, maybe you wanna know, record people having sex and do all of that, that's great. But you couldn't actually do that, right? So at the moment, one day, please, right, but not today. But what is something that you could actually go out and ask people and gather information on you did? Okay, so as a group, come brainstorm for a minute. What are some of the things that you each individually might wanna know about? Come up with one. And then once you have one, what kind of information would you wanna know? What are some of the questions you would ask in order to actually get that information? So let's say you wanna know, what are the most common sexual orientations? Okay? Like, how would you gather them? Right? Like, how would you get that information? What are some of the things you would want? And you could even take a few questions and kind of merge them. That's fine too. Like, but as a group, I want you to work on this. I'll wander around and try and help you. But come up with some questions. What are the demographics you would want to know? Like, so if you're gathering this information, would you want to know someone's age? Would you want to know their major? Would that matter to you? Would you want to know their orientation, their gender identity, their ethnicity, their religious background? Like, maybe you don't want all of it, but what's important? Okay, so start working on that together, and I'll wander around and check in a minute.
I didn't really have trouble. That's what happened. Like that. Yeah, I'm sure that's, yeah.
Yeah, so deep inside, you're gonna
My grandma.
how long?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so. I feel because people outside.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like No, there's a. You guys can have a nice. I'd be right down. Yeah. John. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the one thing we don't have that happens. Like, let's say we all have $20 million, like the rest of there, like my writing is. And you also get the. And then you it's very much, like, really dry. To try and get some good vibe. So I want you to broad enough that you don't find either. We could like pornography and try and look at it, but then how many questions within stuff. Like, what is your generation of and then you could start like. All the same, you still have. Sorry, I'm playing stuff. I like how do you know? Yeah, I mean, my mom loves it, okay, like now, what do we have to do? Yeah, okay, so like. You came out with like. Okay, I don't. It's not. Yeah. And I'm not the thing with those. I think I looked at it. So yeah. And you're. All those goes together. Yeah. And I would want to know what they're sharing. Okay. Okay. And maybe also what we're talking about.
Oh, no, that isn't.
Like, yeah, like. What time is not?
So like.
It's like crack, you know, if you just go and go to science thing. That's like.
Honestly, yeah.
We're all.
It's like. Maybe like it's free. Fill out this first.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Gender and that, but then how we do I guess what I'm saying is, so, are you gay or something?
Like that. Maybe. So yeah. That's why I like the like you don't have to necessarily like put it out there like that. Well, you know, it's like and one of those I can see
I love
like I feel like
Yeah, good luck.
yeah. It's like so like it's happy now and like
Good luck, Tom.
they don't like say that.
Say, we don't have like, best luck.
I was like,
We're talking about it.
Well, or at least with the plan.
Yeah.
And then once you would also want to know how that is. Yes, you guys like. Grow up. Like whoever.
So like when we
Yeah.
what's your gender?
So. Oh, yeah. Actually. Setmire, you guys are talking about it. You don't know about that.
No. What the fuck is happening? But yeah, but they like quite an outlier. Right?
Yeah, like that's really hard. You know,
That's it.
how much like
Let's get off your attention for just a minute here. We still have maybe like 5 more minutes, but I want to give you a piece of information. And I think some of you maybe have already kind of guessed at this, but it might shape where you go from here. Okay. Next class, you're gonna go out and ask these questions. Right? I can leave that out, but I'm gonna tell you that now. Because see, something that I've done this every semester for 12 years.
Oh my
Okay?
gosh.
Yeah? Has somebody asked you?
Yeah, I was just talking to them about how last year somebody walked up to me and was like,
Yes.
how many times have you masturbated this week?
So we're gonna talk next class about how do we preface this. I hope they prefaced it, but just in case we're gonna talk about this more next class. But the reason I wanna mention this is last semester, I saw people do something for the first time that I thought was really cool. And I think our technology now lends to this so easily. A couple of you have questions that you wanna know that you could ask these in a couple of different ways. You could ask somebody flat out person to person and record it. Or if you wanted to create a little like digital survey that they take, you could do that too. And I think they give very different results. Okay, so I just wanted you to have a few minutes to think about that so that somebody in your group, if they wanted to create that between now and Monday, you could. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a few more minutes. You're gonna meet again as a group next time. We're gonna refine our questions. We're gonna talk about boundaries and guidelines and rules, because there are some. But this has always been really, really interesting. Please don't not come next time. Come next time, okay? Right, I hesitate to tell you that we're gonna do it because sometimes people are like, I'm not gonna do it. Okay, but I wanna let you know that there's groups of 3, so it could be divided up that one person asks, and one person reports, and one person observes. Okay, so it doesn't have to necessarily be that you're the one that asks. So if you're feeling intimidated, please come and we can kind of figure out that boundary. Okay, so take a few more minutes and then we'll come back together.
I've gotten in trouble, but nobody in my, yeah. So I had somebody once, like 8 years ago, we went into a classroom. I thought it was all.
Yeah.
But you know what? I won. So, and it was me who got in trouble, not them. But not bad enough that we couldn't keep doing it, so.